It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate. The never-ending war in Afghanistan is as deadly as ever. At least 2 U.S. soldiers have been killed in a suicide attack on a NATO convoy near Kandahar. Hours before, a suicide bomber hit a Shiite mosque in the western city of Herat, killing 29 and wounding dozens more. This comes as a new report from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction says the conflict with the Taliban remains a stalemate. Close to 1,500 Afghan soldiers are dying each month, and civilian casualties are at a record high. Some 40% of the country is controlled by the Taliban or other armed groups. The Pentagon is set to recommend a new strategy for Afghanistan in the coming days. Some top White House officials are drawing up plans on their own. It's recently emerged figures behind 2 private military firms, Erik Prince of Blackwater and Steven Feinberg of DynCorp, were asked to draw up proposals to privatize the Afghan war even more than it already has been. Both Prince and Feinberg backed the creation of a private military force to battle the Taliban. Matthew Hoh is a former State Department official in Afghanistan, now a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Matthew, welcome.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with this latest news. Protests have erupted in Afghanistan today following the suicide attack on this Shiite mosque in Herat, followed by this deadly attack on the NATO convoy in Kandahar. Violence there seems as high as ever.
And it is. And actually, it's higher than ever. Since records have been kept by the Afghan government and by NATO, which didn't begin until about 2008, casualties have just climbed every year, no matter what metric you look at. And there's this fallacy that runs around Washington, D.C., that at some point after we surged troops into Afghanistan, at some point after General McChrystal and General Petraeus showed up with 100,000 more American and NATO troops, things got better. Actually, that's a complete lie. Things never got better in Afghanistan. If you look at whatever metric you want to look at, whatever statistic you want to look at, whether it's the amount of IEDs that have exploded or amount of American troops that got wounded or killed, the amount of civilians who've been wounded or killed, that's probably the most important metric of all, right? The numbers have only ever gone up. And yeah, this past week, another announcement from the United Nations. Every 6 months, we seem to have that, Aaron, that there has been a record number of civilian deaths. And yeah, so again, we see it. I mean, I was kind of surprised you called me. I thought maybe you could have, this is kind of gallows humor, I guess, but you could have the afternoon off. You could really just replay this episode from 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, because it is ad nauseum here, the same news over and over again from Afghanistan. And it's horrid. It's absolutely horrible what has occurred and what continues to occur here. And the only thing that seems to differ is that there seems to be some more splinter groups that maybe occur, some different types of extremist factions that maybe arise in different parts of the country. And, American corporations get richer off of the war, and the people of Afghanistan suffer. That seems to be about the only thing that continues to remain consistent.
Matthew, the only alternative in this case to redundant content is simply just to not cover it. But
that's true. Yeah.
For us, at least,
yeah, exactly. I know exactly.
That's not an option.
And Aaron, thank you, because you know what? Before you had me come on, I checked it today, and I checked the LA Times, and I checked the New York Times, and I checked the USA Today, and I checked the Washington Post. And as we're going to talk about SIGAL, about the Special Inspector General report and everything else, it's not being covered in those things. This is something that doesn't get discussed to the level it should be in terms of having a real conversation about what is occurring in Afghanistan, what has been occurring in Afghanistan, what the United States and the West has done in that country, what the people of that country of Afghanistan have been enduring. Look, the way we discussed Afghanistan is we discussed Afghanistan as a war, not as a country, not as a collection of millions of people, but as a war, as a verb or as a thing. We don't discuss it as an actual country. So thankfully, we are discussing this today, right? But back to this here, by any metric, by any standard, by any looking at events in Afghanistan over the last decade and a half, it has just gotten progressively worse,
Right. Matthew,
and with no end in sight.
Yeah, so let's look at how some very influential people are looking at that same situation and coming up with their solution. I mentioned White House officials, including Steve Bannon, recruiting Erik Prince, formerly of Blackwater, the founder of Blackwater, and Steven Feinberg of another military firm, DynCorp, meeting. Bannon met with these two to talk about sending even more private contractors to Afghanistan. Now, already I should say, I believe the ratio of private contractors to soldiers in Afghanistan is about 3 to 1 currently. So when we talk about this plan to privatize the war, it should be stressed that this is privatizing it even more than it already is. And both Prince and Feinberg are trying to sell the White House on this plan to basically come up with a private army to take on the Taliban directly. Prince wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal that apparently President Trump read and liked, called "The MacArthur Model for Afghanistan." And the subhead was "Consolidate authority into one person, an American viceroy who would lead all coalition efforts, including a private army." Matthew.
Yeah, correct. And actually, he originally went on to Fox News, Prince, and spoke about this on Hannity's program because he knows that President Trump watches that and made this appeal there. And in that case, rather than using the example of General MacArthur as the post-World War II ruler, post-World War II viceroy in Japan, he used the example of the British in India and how for a couple centuries, the British ruled India via the East India Company, utilizing basically a private enterprise to maintain their colonial possession there, backed up, of course, by the authority of the Crown and the Crown's army and the Crown's treasury. And he also pointed to Winston Churchill as well, neglecting to mention the millions and millions of Indians who perished under, and suffered under such rule. But he uses it as an example. And this, of course, attracted the attention of President Trump and the White House, enough so that this plan was presented to General Mattis, was brought in to the Pentagon as a serious proposal. The president's son-in-law entertained the proposal along with these two men from private industry, from Blackwater and from DynCorp, and it was presented to the Secretary of Defense as a real option.
I should say that Mattis declined to include their suggestions in his policy recommendation to the White House that is expected in the coming days. But it remained. But the fact that these two were recruited by Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner means that it very well still might be on the table. Certainly, President Trump will be hearing about it, as he has likely been already. In the last minute we have, though, Matt, let me ask you more about this Special Inspector General report that came out this week, because it includes a recommendation that a report on sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, by the Afghan military be declassified. What's going on there?
Well, this is something we've known for a while in Afghanistan, and this goes back to the warlords that we put back into power. As many people are familiar with Afghanistan, when we came into Afghanistan in 2001, we put the warlords back into power that the Taliban had removed from the Civil War of the 1990s. Many of these men take part of a practice involving what are called dancing boys. Basically, it comes down to raping children, raping young boys, teenage boys. The American military has known about this practice. They have refused to do anything to stop this practice. It is a clear human rights violation. And it has gone on with the complicit knowledge and observation of the American military for the last 15 years. When I was there, we knew about it. We knew who was doing it. I have spoken to other people. Guys still talk about it. You hear stories about it all the time. And this past year, the United States Congress authorized the Special Inspector General and to look into it, as well as the Congress is also maybe applying the Leahy Amendment, which says that the United States will not sell weapons to any nation that is engaging in human rights violations. So,
and what is the calculus there behind overlooking child sexual abuse? Is it simply that we need these guys for our fight against the Taliban, so we have to let it slide?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an embarrassment to us that these are our allies because we're in bed with these warlords, with these so it's an embarrassment to us, but also we need them because just like the drug lords that we're complicit with, that we need to have as allies, we also need these warlords to be our allies. So we can't burn our relationship with them because we need them, because they are the militia commanders, or they are the Afghan generals, or they are the people that we need to maintain our position there. But also, too, it will be an embarrassment to us that we have gone on for so long knowing this and allowing it to go on. But this is nothing, Aaron, this is nothing new. We do this in Iraq as well. I mean, in terms of knowingly allow the Iraqi government to violate certain laws. We know each year, what we've done in Iraq is that Iraq has child soldiers in its militias. And so what we do is we give Iraq a waiver on its violations of having, child soldiers in its militias, which then allows us to continue to sell weapons to the Iraqi government. Other nations don't receive such waivers. But because Iraq is an ally and Iraq purchases billions and billions of dollars of our weapons, they receive a waiver. So this is nothing new. This is par. This is the standard of American hypocrisy in our foreign policy and our defense policies. This is how our empire works, right? We don't have a moral standard that we abide by. We just have platitudes that we choose to ignore when it's appropriate for us to do so for our own purposes. But this is something that. So what happened in this report with the Special Inspector General is they have asked the Defense Department to release the report on the child sexual abuse by the Afghan security forces, which, as we know from the reports from our own soldiers, from our own experiences there, is widespread. But which the official report from our Defense Department from the American Defense Department has been classified, and the American Defense Department says it's classified for security reasons. But, it's security reasons. And I go back to what Neil Shaheen, who wrote one of the best books about the Vietnam War, and also, too, by extension, one of the best books about these wars as well, because the truth just carries over, a bright, shining lie. What Neil Shaheen said about secrets is that, secrets aren't meant to protect the public from dangers of other governments. They're there to protect the public from the embarrassments and the screw-ups and the true knowledge of their own government. So that's what we're dealing with here, is that the American government knows that they are in bed with rapists, these warlords in Afghanistan have been for a decade and a half. And to officially acknowledge so undermines so much of what they've been saying about Afghanistan, about it being the good war. So that's why they don't want to release it.
Well, Matthew, speaking of warlords, let's see, as the Trump administration weighs in the coming days or weeks on its supposed new Afghan strategy, whether that entails going into business with these private U.S. warlords behind Blackwater and DynCorp. Matthew Hoh, former State Department official in Afghanistan, now a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.